Mr. Anderson, the board has voted. That strip of shoreline is now common property. You have 30 days to remove your dock, your furniture, and any personal effects from the lakefront area, or the association will do it for you and bill you for the labor. That letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in January of 2022. I read it twice standing at the end of my driveway in a light snow, my coffee going cold in my other hand. The woman who wrote it was named Diane Holloway, and she was the president of the Linder Lake Homeowners Association. She had a clipboard and a pearl necklace and a husband named Walt who wore boat shoes even in January. And in 3 years of living 40 yards from my property line, she had never once looked up the deed to my lot. That was her mistake. What Diane did not know, and never bothered to find out, is that my deed does not stop at the waterline. My mother purchased that lot on the 14th of October, 1987, and the instrument recorded at the county that day contained boundary language that placed the far edge of my property at the center line of Linder Lake, 190 feet out from the natural shore. The lot is 1.4 acres of upland, a narrow shelf of beach, a dock my son and I rebuilt 2 summers ago, and then 190 feet of water, all the way to the middle of the lake. The Linder Lake Homeowners Association was not formed until 2019. It had no legal mechanism, no covenant, and no authority over a parcel recorded 32 years before the association existed. If you were sitting where I was that morning holding that letter in the cold, knowing what I knew about that deed, what would you have done? If you are new here, I'm glad you found this. What I am about to tell you took 26 months, 6 separate documented incidents, 1 county recorder's hearing, and 1 collapsed $2 million resort deal to finish. Stay with me. My name is Eric Anderson. I am 53 years old. I spent 22 years in the Army as a combat engineer. And when you spend 2 decades building bridges in places where someone is actively trying to blow them up, you develop certain habits. You document everything. You photograph everything before you touch it. You keep a log because the log is the record and the record is the argument. You do not make a single claim you cannot back with paper and a date. Those habits came home with me, and they are the reason I still own every inch of that property today. My mother, Ruth Anderson, bought the Linder Lake lot in the fall of 1987. She was 51 years old, recently retired from nursing, and she drove out to look at the lot alone on a Saturday morning and wrote a check before lunch. She'd told me. She stood at the waterline and decided that was all she needed. I was in my 20s then, stationed overseas, and she sent me a photograph of the dock that first summer, with a note on the back that said the water was cold and the bass were running, and I should come home when I could. I still have the photograph. She used the property every summer for more than 20 years. When she died in late 2008, she left it to me. I recorded the inheritance in March of 2009, and because I was an engineer, and because I had been trained to verify everything I was handed, I read the deed before I signed anything. That was when I first noticed the centerline language. Boundary running to the center line of Linder Lake as established by the original 1954 plat. I called the county title office and asked if that language was standard for riparian lots on the lake. The clerk told me it was standard for lots platted under the 1954 plan before the state revised its shoreline rules. Anything recorded under the original plat retained that boundary. Mine was one of 14 lots on the eastern shore that carried it. I hired a surveyor to walk the boundary that spring. He confirmed the center line position at 190 feet from the natural shore. I paid him $850, and I put his report, the deed copy, and a plat map in a manila folder, labeled it with a property address and the date, and set it in the top drawer of my filing cabinet I did not think I would need it urgently. I was wrong about the timing, but I was right to have it. I moved onto the property full-time in 2019 after I retired from the Army. My son Caleb was 13 then. His mother, my wife Sandra, had died of a brain aneurysm 2 years earlier, and the decision to move to the lake was partly practical and partly about needing to be somewhere that felt like she had been, because she had loved the place every summer we visited my mother. Caleb and I rebuilt the dock the summer we arrived, replacing the old boards plank by plank over 6 weekends. He was tireless. He carried lumber and held boards while I drilled, and by the end of the last weekend he could set a screw as cleanly as I could. We painted the dock railing white because that was the color in the photograph my mother had sent me decades earlier. The HOA had formed that same year, 2019, organized by a developer named Walt Holloway and run, starting in 2021, by his wife Diane. Walt had bought 4 lots on the western shore and 2 on the northern end between 2018 and 2020. He served on the initial HOA board before stepping back to let Diane take the president's seat, which should have been a signal to every neighbor paying dues that the arrangement was not entirely civic-minded. I did not join the HOA. My lot predated it, and the covenants had no hold on pre-existing recorded parcels. I paid my own lake maintenance tax directly to the county, as I had always done. The first time I met Diane in person, she drove her white SUV to my mailbox on a Friday afternoon in late October 2021. She had a clipboard resting on her forearm and a lanyard with a laminated badge I could see from 10 feet away. The badge said Linder Lake HOA Community Liaison. I noted it was not a government credential of any kind, which I already knew, and I waited. She said the association was doing a compliance survey of all properties touching the shoreline and asked if I would allow a walkthrough. I said my property was not subject to HOA covenants and a walkthrough was not something I could agree to. She smiled. The way people smile when they believe the person in front of them does not understand how things work. She said, "Mr. Anderson, every property touching the lake is functionally part of our jurisdiction. That is just how it operates." I said I would encourage you to read the deed before we go any further. She wrote something on her clipboard, said she would be in touch, and drove back up the road. She filed the first formal notice 3 weeks later, in November 2021, citing what she called unauthorized private modifications to shared shoreline, which was her way of describing the dock. Caleb and I had rebuilt. I photographed the notice, filed it in the folder, and wrote the date and the notice number in my log. That was incident number 1. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you to subscribe if you have not already, because the next part of this story is where the motive becomes clear, and I think it changes the way every incident before and after it looks. In December 2021, my neighbor Pete Garza knocked on my door on a Sunday evening. Pete owned the lot directly north of mine. He was a retired electrician, good with records himself, and he had been attending every HOA meeting since the beginning because he did not trust the Holloways and wanted to know what they were planning. He sat down at my kitchen table and told me what he had learned. Walt Holloway had been in contact with a regional resort development company for more than a year. The company was planning a mid-range lakefront resort on the eastern shore, and the deal they had structured required clear and unencumbered access to a continuous strip of shoreline running from the northern dock area to the southern boat launch. My lot sat directly in the middle of that strip. The resort contract, as Pete understood it from what he had heard, was contingent on the HOA delivering clean title to all lakefront common areas in that corridor. Walt stood to collect approximately $2.1 million from the sale if the deal closed. My dock was not an aesthetic nuisance. It was in the way of a real estate transaction. I thanked Pete. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a while looking at the folder. Then I opened it and counted what was in it. 1 deed, 1 surveyor's report, 1 plat map, and 1 HOA notice. I added Pete's information as a written summary. Dated and signed. I labeled it as background, financial context. Then I went to bed. The January 2022 letter, demanding I surrender the strip, arrived 4 weeks after Pete's visit. That was the letter I described at the start. I photographed it, logged it as incident number 2, and drafted a 1-page written response stating that my property boundary was established by a recorded deed predating the HOA's formation, that the strip in question was private property. I sent it certified, return receipt requested, and kept the green card. Incident number 3 came in March 2022. A man appeared at my property line on a Wednesday morning, carrying a survey pole and wearing a vest that said County Assessor on the back. I walked out to meet him. He was polite and said the HOA had requested a boundary verification. I asked to see his county ID. He showed me a card with the county seal, which was legitimate. I told him his survey request had originated from a private association with no jurisdiction over my parcel, but that I had no objection to a county assessor confirming the recorded boundary. And I handed him a copy of the 1987 deed and the 2009 survey report from my own assessor's file. He studied the papers for 2 minutes. Then he said the centerline language was clear, and that his office would respond to the HOA's request. Accordingly, he left. I called the county assessor's office that afternoon and confirmed the visit was logged. The assessor's written response to the HOA, which I obtained through a public records request 6 weeks later, stated that the boundary of my parcel extended to the center line of Linder Lake, as established by the 1954 plat, and that no encroachment into common area had been identified. I logged that as item number 3 and filed the assessor's response behind the green card from January. Incident number 4 arrived in September 2022, and this one involved Caleb. He was 16 by then, and he had a habit of going down to the dock in the early evening to fish. He did this 3 or 4 evenings a week all through the summer and into the fall. On a Thursday evening in the second week of September, Diane drove her SUV to the edge of my property, walked down to the dock with 2 people I did not recognize, and told Caleb that he was on HOA common property and needed to leave. Caleb called me. I was 20 minutes away picking up hardware at a supply store. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge in it. He said, "Dad, there are people on the dock." I said, "Stay where you are. Don't argue. I'm coming." When I got home, Diane and her 2 companions were still at the dock. Caleb was standing at the far end holding his fishing rod, which told me he had not moved. I walked down and stood between him and Diane. Diane said, "Mr. Anderson, we have given you notice twice. This area belongs to the association." I said, "You have given me 2 letters containing a false claim. The boundary on this property runs to the center of the lake. I have the deed, and I have the county assessor's response confirming it. You and your associates need to leave my property now." She looked at me for a long moment. One of the men with her started to say something, and she touched his arm to stop him. She said, "We will be pursuing formal action." I said, "Please do. I will have my attorney's address for you by the end of the week." They left. Caleb did not say anything until Diane's taillights cleared the tree line at the top of the drive. Then he said, "She really hasn't read the deed, has she?" I said, "No, she really has not." He nodded and went back to casting, and I sat down on the dock bench and watched the water until the sun was below the tree line on the far shore. I logged Incident 4 the same night. I had also filmed Diane's arrival and the dock confrontation on the security camera I had installed at the corner of the boathouse in the spring of 2022, after Incident 2. The footage showed the time, date, and a clear view of all three people on my dock. I backed it to a second drive and labeled a file. Incident 5 came in January 2023. A letter from an attorney named Gerald Bright, representing the Linder Lake HOA, stated that my continued use of the contested shoreline strip constituted trespass on association property and demanded $4,800 in accumulated fines covering 18 months of alleged covenant violations. The letter cited 3 specific provisions of the HOA covenants. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, a quiet woman named Frances, who had handled property law in the county for 30 years, and who, when I described the situation in her office, put on her reading glasses, read the deed language, and then set it down on her desk and said, "Eric, they cannot win this in any courtroom in the state." She wrote to Gerald Bright on my behalf, cited the 1987 recording date and the 2019 HOA formation date, enclosed a copy of the county assessor's public response, and stated plainly that my property predated the covenants by 32 years. She invited him to review the deed before his client spent any more money on legal correspondence. Gerald Bright did not respond for 11 weeks. Incident 6 came in November 2023. Walt's contractors showed up at the southern end of my property line with a truck, 2 rolls of orange fencing, and a box of boundary stakes. They had no permit, no county authorization, and no legal instrument of any kind. They told my neighbor Pete, who happened to be walking his dog on the access road, that they were working for the HOA. Pete photographed the truck, the license plate, and the workers, and sent me the images before I had even seen the truck. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line, reported an attempted unauthorized boundary encroachment, and drove to the property line. The deputy who responded was a young man named Kowalski, who arrived within 20 minutes and asked to see documentation on both sides. The contractors produced a work order signed by Diane in her capacity as HOA president. I produced the deed and the assessor's response. Deputy Kowalski read both, looked at the work order, and told the contractors they needed to stop, that there was a documented boundary dispute and they had no county authorization to proceed. They loaded the stakes back into the truck and left. Deputy Kowalski asked me if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. He filed it on the spot. I photographed the report number, added it to the log, and called Frances that afternoon. Frances said, "They are getting closer to something actionable. Keep filing everything." I had 6 numbered incidents in the folder by December 2023. I had the deed, the surveyor's report, the plat map, the assessor's written response, the certified return receipts, the attorney correspondence, the security camera footage from Incident 4, Pete's photographs from Incident 6, and the deputy's report. The folder had started as a single manila envelope. It was now a 3-inch binder. March 2024 was when the HOA board held a formal vote. I received no notice of the meeting, which was itself a procedural violation I noted in my log. Pete attended and recorded the session on his phone, as he had every right to do under state open meeting guidelines for common interest associations. He sent me the recording at 11 o'clock at night after the meeting ended. The board voted 4-1 to formally designate the Lakefront Strip as HOA common property, to record a resolution with the county asserting that designation, and to authorize Diane to post a formal notice of the action on my dock. The one dissenting vote was a board member named Carla Osgood, who said, on the recording in a flat and tired voice, that the association had already received a county assessor's response contradicting the claim and that she was not going to vote to walk into a lawsuit. Nobody on the board responded to her. Diane posted a notice on a Thursday morning in the last week of March. She stapled it directly to one of the dock boards. I photographed it from every angle, filmed the staple holes it left in the wood, and sent the photographs and the recording of the board meeting to Frances. The same day, Frances called me back that evening. She said the formal recording of a false property claim with the county, if they followed through on it, would move us out of private dispute and into a civil filing for slander of title. She said Walt's name was likely on the resort contract, and that when the contract surfaced, every dollar of the $2.1 million deal would be relevant to demonstrating financial motive. I asked her when she wanted to move. She said, "Let them come one more step. When they try to file that resolution with the county recorder, we will be in the room." They came in April. Walt's contractors arrived on a Tuesday morning at 7:45. There were 3 of them this time, in a company truck with Walt's development logo on the door. They had survey stakes, a driver, and a legal-looking packet of documents that one of them was carrying when he came to my door. The packet turned out to be a copy of the HOA board resolution, a hand-drawn lot schematic, and a letter from Gerald Bright asserting the association's right to mark the boundary of the newly designated common area. Caleb was home. It was a school holiday. He came to the door behind me and stood quietly while I read through the packet. I asked the contractor if he had a county permit for boundary staking. He said the HOA had authorized the work. I said that was not the same thing and asked again. He said he would need to call his office. While he was making that call, Caleb said to me, quietly, "Are they really going to stake the dock?" I said, "They are going to try." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom loved that dock. I did not say anything to that. There was nothing to add to it. I called Pete. He was at my property line in 8 minutes. I called Frances. She said, 'File the deed at the recorder's office this morning. I will meet you there.' I went back inside, took the binder from the cabinet, and drove to the county government building. Pete followed me in his truck. The contractors were still at my driveway when we left their supervisor on a call, and the stakes still in the bed of the truck. The Linder Lake County Recorder's office occupies a long room on the 2nd floor of the county building, with a public counter along one wall, and a seating area with 4 chairs and a low table. Frances was already there when I arrived, standing at the counter with her briefcase open. The room was not empty. There were 2 clerks behind the counter, a retired couple waiting for their own deed review, and, in a piece of timing, I had not arranged a reporter from the county weekly named Shara Blank, who was there covering an unrelated property story and who, when she saw what was about to happen, stayed. June Rideau was the title examiner on duty. I had spoken with her briefly during my 2009 re-recording process. She was a precise, compact woman in her mid-50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and took her time with every document. I set the binder on the counter and told her I needed a formal title examination of my recorded deed, with particular attention to the boundary language, because a homeowners association was in the process of recording a conflicting resolution with this office. She said, "Is that the Linder Lake HOA matter?" I said it was. She said they had received the HOA resolution by certified mail the previous week and had placed it on hold, pending review, because the language describing the strip conflicted with existing recorded instruments in their index. She opened her terminal, pulled up the 1987 recording, and then opened the binder I had placed on the counter and read both documents in full. No one in the room spoke for 3 minutes. She set down the binder and looked up. She said, "Mr. Anderson, the boundary language in the 14th of October, 1987, recorded deed for your parcel states, and I am reading directly from the instrument, that the eastern boundary of the lot runs to the center line of Linder Lake, as established by the original 1954 plat survey. That is the boundary of record. This office cannot accept a resolution that asserts a conflicting claim to the same parcel without a court order establishing superior title, and no such order exists in our index." She took off her reading glasses. She said, "The resolution submitted by the Linder Lake Homeowners Association is rejected." The retired couple at the table behind me had stopped a conversation at some point during June's reading, and the room was quiet enough that the courthouse ventilation system was audible. Frances thanked her, made a note, and picked up her briefcase. The reporter, Shara Blank, had her notebook out. I drove back to the property. The contractors were gone. 2 stakes had been driven into the grass at the edge of my lot, not near the dock, just at the upper tree line, which meant they had started and then stopped. Pete pulled them out and handed them to me, and I set them in my truck bed. Caleb was sitting on the dock when I came down the path. He had a fishing rod in the water, and he looked up when he heard my boots on the planks. I said, "We're done." He looked at me for a moment and then out at the water. He said, "She rejected it." I said, "On the record, in the room." He nodded slowly and turned back to his line. Frances filed the civil suit the following week. The complaint named Diane and Walt both cited the board resolution as a recorded false claim, outlined the financial motive connected to the resort contract, and attached the security footage from Incident 4, Pete's photographs from Incident 6, the board meeting recording. The complaint asked for a declaratory judgment confirming the boundary, injunctive relief preventing any future HOA claim on the parcel, and compensatory damages. The resort company, upon receiving notice of the civil action and the title examiner's rejection, exercised the contingency clause in their contract with Walt. The contract had required clear and unencumbered title to the lakefront corridor. When the title examiner confirmed that my strip could not be conveyed to the HOA without a court order that did not exist, the contingency failed. The company canceled the contract within 3 weeks. The $2.1 million deal Walt had been quietly assembling for 2 years came apart in the time it took to read a 1987 deed. The civil judgment came down in May 2024. Diane and Walt were found jointly liable for $38,000 in compensatory and legal costs. The court issued a declaratory judgment confirming my recorded boundary. The deed language was noted in the court order, and June Riedel's official rejection letter was entered as Exhibit A. The HOA board removed Diane from the president's seat at its June meeting. Carla Osgood, the woman who had voted no in March, took the chair. Pete testified at the county hearing, confirming that my boundary markers had survived all 6 incidents intact, and that he had personally witnessed contractor activity at my property line without any county permit or authorization. The stakes that contractors had driven into my upper lot were introduced as physical evidence, their company markings traced back to Walt's development firm. Shara Blank ran her story in the County Weekly 2 days after the judgment. It ran above the fold, and the headline used the phrase centerline deed, which I had not heard anyone use before, but which was exactly correct. The summer after, the judgment was the first summer in 3 years, when no one came to my driveway with a letter, a clipboard, or a truck full of stakes. Caleb fished from the dock every evening he was home. Sometimes I sat with him, and sometimes I left him to it. He is at ease on that water, in a way that reminds me of his mother, which is a complicated thing to carry, but not an unwelcome one. She had told me, the last summer she visited before she got sick, that the dock was her favorite place on earth. And I think Caleb knows that, or has worked it out for himself. The binder lives in the top drawer of the filing cabinet, behind the surveyor's report and the original deed, where it has always been. I look at it sometimes, not to confirm anything, but because it is an accurate record of 26 months, during which I did not raise my voice, did not confront anyone in anger, did not damage any property, and did not once ask anyone to take my word for anything. Everything I needed was in that folder from the day I inherited the land. Here is the lesson I want to leave you with. When you buy property, read the deed before you sign anything. Read the whole instrument, not the summary. If you already own property and have never read the recorded deed in full, go get a copy from your county recorder and read it today. Look at the boundary language specifically. If the lot touches water, look at where that boundary ends, because in many states, lots platted before modern shoreline regulations carry centerline language. That means you own more than you think you do. Keep the deed, the survey, and the plat map together in one labeled file from the first day. If someone sends you a letter claiming authority over your property, do not throw it away and do not panic. Photograph it, log it with the date, and file it. If they escalate, add the next document to the file. Every letter they send, every action they take, without your permission, becomes evidence of the claim they cannot support. The documentation does not win the case at the end. It wins the case from the first day. You are just waiting for the moment to show it. A homeowners association is a private corporation. Its covenants bind only the lots it was formed to govern. If your property was recorded before the association existed, you are not a member, you owe no dues, and their letters carry no more legal weight than a note from a neighbor. That is not my opinion, that is property law, and it is in the recorded instruments at your county courthouse available to anyone who asks. The calm is not passivity. The calm is what you practice while the file gets thicker, and the file is what you hand the title examiner when the time comes. If you have had a fight like this one, or if you are in one right now, I read everything. If you found this story useful, subscribe, because the next one I am going to tell you involves a retired surveyor who held a prescriptive easement over a road the county had paved and declared public, until a developer fenced it off and called it a private amenity. Same principle, different instrument, different public moment. Same result. I will see you there.